Hello folks, it's Charlie in Westeros here, and I'm making this video to discuss the fate of House Stark in the series A Song of Ice and Fire. More specifically, I am interested in discussing which of the remaining Stark children will survive by the end of the series, and which of them will come to inherit Winterfell as well as the entirety of the North. Of course, this video does contain spoilers, so please turn away now if you do not want anything ruined for you in this series. I would also like to emphasize that I do not personally know what is going to happen in Book 5 and 6, with respect to the Starks especially, but that anything I state in this video is just my personal opinion and my own speculations as to what may come their way. So if my ideas for the series somehow offend you, then please take a step back, because that's all they are, thoughts and ideas, not the reality for A Song of Ice and Fire. Now, I will go through each of the Starks by order of, succession to Winterfell, with the only possible exception being Jon Snow, who I would actually like to address first in this video. So, if I can just get into it. In discussing Jon Snow specifically, I want to emphasize a huge disclaimer with respect to him, because the most popular theories basically view him as the child of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, and basically place him in a role of greater importance than any, claim over Winterfell. And while I totally acknowledge this role for Jon as, very likely, obviously, I will play devil's advocate here for just a moment, only to see how he might fit in the line of succession as an heir to Winterfell, if, and only if, Ned is truly his father, and if he were successfully legitimized as well. So, there have already been two instances where Jon had the possibility of being legitimized, actually. The first was done, although secretly, by Robb Stark when it was, discovered that Sansa was going to be married off to Tyrion, and given that Robb Stark's younger brothers at the time were, and actually still are, largely presumed to be dead, this legitimization act by Robb was done in order to counter a possible Lannister attempt of taking over the North with Sansa as a, titular ruler via her marriage to Tyrion. Of course, as far as we know, this plan was only shared by Robb with Catelyn, his mother, whereas most people, including, Jon himself, were kept unaware of it. The second moment, of course, occurs when Stannis tries to legitimize Jon in order to have, a Stark claimant for his cause in taking over the North. Now, it is hinted that this is something that Jon Snow does desire. He does have this urge to, be the Stark of Winterfell, but it is only really out of guilt for his dead siblings and out of a sense of, duty that he seems to decline this offer on Stannis' behalf. Now, these are two aforementioned occurrences which hint that, maybe Jon might one day take over the North, and, including the fact that Jon places his faith in the old gods, a point of interest, that might point towards Jon becoming, the prince of, or king of Winterfell, or of the North, might also go with the old saying, of how the third time is the charm of, if he is offered once again or forced into leading the North. And, also given these aforementioned hints towards making him ruler there, he might just end up taking over Winterfell in the end. But by the end of Book 5, he was, of course, preparing to march to fight the Bolton forces, and assuming he isn't actually assassinated and that he is able to defeat the Boltons, there might be a chance that, Jon would be offered the North yet again a third time, and after all, who's to say he would decline a third offer? However, and I think most of you would definitely agree with this, is that there were way too many signs that would say otherwise. To name a few, the notion that he is the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, and not Ned Stark, or any other of Ned Stark's, possible matches like Ashara Dayne, the fact that he was also commander of the Night's Watch, the fact that, again, he might actually be dead right now, the fact that he might turn out to be, this Azor Ahai prince that was promised figure, and of course the fact that he is half-siblings, or maybe not so half-siblings, or that is half-siblings or not so half-siblings are still alive, would likely be revealed, and, the fact that these siblings might be revealed naturally stands in the way of Jon becoming ruler of the North. And so if I take the direction of Jon Snow not being a direct son of Ned Stark, which is currently the most popular hypothesis out there, then I would halt my discussion of him right here and, basically focus on the other four siblings of Ned and Cat, who, of course, are much more prominent in terms of their likelihood of becoming the Starks to rule Winterfell. So, by order of succession and discounting Jon's possible legitimization as a Stark, Bran is logically the first in line to succeed as a ruler of Winterfell. As you've probably guessed, though, there are so many issues with this possible outcome. The first issue is that as far as the world knows, and except for maybe a few individuals, Bran is basically dead. So there are really only a few reliable sources in Westeros that may unquestionably and truthfully identify him as Ned's son if he were to leave, the cave of the Three-Eyed Crow and return south of the Wall. The second main issue is, of course, the fact that by Book 5, Bran seems to have intrinsically linked himself with this Green Seer throne and this Three-Eyed Raven figure, and given Bran's own apparent need to remain there, his fate, as far as we are concerned, is to become the next Green Seer and remain in that cave, at least physically anyway. And I am not counting his ability to look through, the weirwood trees, and therefore it does seem very unlikely that he will be able to return to Winterfell and take over as ruler of the North, at least as far as we are led to believe anyway. My personal opinion is that Bran will never directly see Winterfell or his siblings again, kind of in a similar fashion to the current Three-Eyed Raven, Brynden Rivers, who assumedly was never seen again after becoming the Green Seer, following his role, I believe, as Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, and given that he lived in that cave under the weirwood tree for such a long time, and up till the events currently taking place in A Song of Ice and Fire, which is, indicates that he basically just disappeared. If you want to hear some more developed theories on the path Bran will take as a Green Seer, however, I would definitely recommend checking out James Johnson's channel, which is in the info box below. So please check that out, because he has some great, well-developed thoughts on, Bran and his role in the events that will come during Book 6 and 7. So I'll leave that there with you guys. Anyway, after Bran, the next in line to rule Winterfell is Rickon. Now, as far as Rickon is concerned, it seems like there is a fair bit more hope of seeing him as a more direct and physically present role in the series than Bran. If I were to go over those hints which might indicate that Rickon would make a reappearance in the North and possibly eventually take over Winterfell, we can, go by the fact that due to the survivor of the Sack of Winterfell, Wex Pike, Rickon is confirmed and known to be alive by at least some of the major figures in the series. And he seemingly has traveled to Skagos, apparently, with the wild woman Osha. Also, at least one of the other Northern Lords, Wyman Manderly, and his retinue of White Harbor, they more or less have sworn to take up Stannis' cause if, of course, Davos Seaworth is able to go to Skagos and retrieve Rickon and his direwolf and bring them back to White Harbor in order to prove his validity as a Stark. Now, of course, this would be done in order to thwart the Boltons' claim to the North, who are trying to use, this false Arya figure in order to claim that land. But since, by order of succession, if Bran were to reappear, then Rickon is well ahead of Arya as the Stark that could rule Winterfell, and logistically speaking, the Northern Lords would then have to swear their allegiance to Rickon and the Manderlys, and by virtue of that, to Stannis Baratheon, of course. Now, on the surface, and assuming Davos is successful in bringing both Rickon and Shaggy Dog back to White Harbor and have the Manderlys swear fealty to Stannis, and of course, if Stannis is able to hold power in Westeros, then, Rickon would become the ruler of the North. However, there are a number of issues that I feel might not make this outcome possible. For one thing, Rickon is 3 years old when the series begins, and if memory serves, I don't think he is any older than 4 or 5 years old when he is, fully separated from his family. Now, Rickon is already described as a bit of a wild child as well, just like his direwolf, Shaggy Dog. So even though he is a kid, he doesn't come across as someone who would innately be easily controlled. On top of this, if, it'll have been maybe 2-3 years since he's been living on Skagos, and correct me if I'm wrong on that figure, but, assuming he has been there for some time at least, and in the care of both the Skagosi and his guardian / pseudo-adoptive mother, Osha, I kind of find it very difficult to believe that he would be easily permitted to leave, or even wish to leave the islands in the hands of a stranger fighting for fairly random king. The only working points Davos might potentially have towards his advantage in bringing Rickon back that I can think of include, the possibility that Shaggy Dog, maybe sensing that Davos is not a threat, would behave friendly towards him, and maybe the promise that Rickon will be reunited with his half-brother Jon Snow, maybe, would also work in his favor. Again, however, who's to say that in the absence of his birth family, Rickon hasn't better adapted himself to the ways of Skagos and perceives the Skagosi as his true family now. The Skagosi have apparently fought historic wars with the North as well, so who's to say they won't use Rickon for their own interests, or use him for the, interests of a different faction entirely, maybe? Or they could very well choose to use Rickon for the interests of Stannis, maybe, if they're given some kind of good, fair share of the winnings in this war, if that makes any sense. After all, even though the Skagosi are technically under the sway of Winterfell, they are so far removed, both geographically, culturally, and assumedly politically as well, that they could very well potentially opt to use Rickon for their own intentions, and these intentions, they might not only be made clear in books 6 or 7, if that is indeed the case. Of course, these are all just so many different, hypotheticals I'm listing, and obviously I don't know what's actually going to happen, but I do have some personal doubts that Rickon will be fully rehabilitated in Winterfell and amongst his, remaining members of the scattered family, let alone inherit Winterfell. So there seems to be an inherent familial division within the Starks, where one sibling ends up, ruling Winterfell, and another is a bit more wild. And I'm kind of thinking here of a contrast between Ned and his, older, more intense sibling or brother, Brandon Stark. But I'm kind of digressing there. So my personal hunch is that Rickon will endure amongst the Skagosi, and again, yes, I realize that Skagos is technically under the sway of Winterfell, but they are also so historically isolated that I almost feel more confident counting them as a faction unto themselves, sort of like the Wildlings in a weird way. But maybe a sibling like Sansa or even Jon potentially could act as a guardian for Rickon until he comes of age and is able to rule the North of his own accord. But of course, that's assuming that one of these two figures are able to take over the North in the first place and can successfully find and even bring Rickon back alive, in which case I could see that occurring, or this occurrence of Rickon ruling the North coming to pass. But at the moment, I really just feel like Rickon might be stuck at Skagos for a while, and he might be becoming more and more attuned with his warging abilities there. Remember, it was Ned Stark, the only Stark other than Robb, who doesn't appear to have warged, as well as Sansa, of course, but running with this, this kind of theme, the only Stark who would be able to continue it as a non-warging ruler would, as I mentioned, be Sansa. So, of course, assuming that they stick to this trend, again, where Rickon is wild and sort of remains in the unknown, I think, the opposite could be actually said of Sansa Stark. So I think Sansa's a good character to address in this line of succession, since she is next in line. And with Sansa, I think she is a character who has a lot of potential when it comes to inheriting and ruling the North. For one, out of all the Starks out there, with the potentially possible exception of Jon Snow, she is the one Stark alive who has or will have the backing of an entire other realm, I guess, in quotation marks, or kingdom, which, of course, in this case is the Vale of Arryn. Of course, there is a lot of heated discussion out there surrounding what will happen to Sansa in The Winds of Winter, as well as, the series as a whole. But it goes without saying that Sansa is the only one living Stark who has had a significant amount of people who can or will be able to more easily in the future and, also readily identify her for who she is, given that, of course, she is more or less known to be still alive and out there. And given that she was at King's Landing for such a long time, she is, a fairly prominent face that could be, I guess, recognized by a lot of the land's elite. And of course, she's much older than the other Starks alive. Or a fair amount older. Now, if the books were to progress insofar as Littlefinger and the Lords of the Vale are plotting to do right now, we would have basically Sansa married to the next Lord of the Vale, assuming, of course, that the little boy, Robin Arryn, is successfully murdered or done away with or whatever. And, if with herself revealing herself for who she truly is, there would be a political union between the North and the Vale. Now, of course, this direction also presupposes that Rickon is unsuccessfully taken back from Skagos, since if that occurrence were to occur, it could also cause some issues with Sansa trying to claim the North for herself. But even before these, what-if possibilities, though, I think we are already given a much greater hint in pointing the direction of events for Sansa from the books or from the more recent books in the series. For one thing, and this idea is already starting to get hinted at by the end of actually last season of the show, season 4, is the idea that Sansa is already starting to take control of her own destiny. It would already appear that she's possibly attempting to use her charm over Littlefinger for her own benefit, and certainly many people seem to think that this is the direction her character is also taking. So the real question we, I think, as readers need to ask is, will Sansa fully transition into a completely and totally manipulative character? And if so, will she feel comfortable sending her young cousin, Robin Arryn, to his death at the expense of her, quote, political success? Again, I don't know what is going to happen, but as far as my hunch goes with Sansa, we will see her succeed as Queen of the North for at least some time. And as I explained in my Fate of House Lannister video, I do think that the prophecy by Maggie the Frog on Cersei can be taken fairly literally, and that this younger and more beautiful queen in that prophecy will take all that Cersei holds dear, and of course that figure will be Sansa Stark. Now, I don't wish to go over all that details of that theory that I raised in another video, actually, so if you're interested in hearing more about that whole prophecy with Maggie the Frog and Queen Cersei, or if you haven't seen it, please check out my video on the Fate of House Lannister. There's a link to that in the box below, info box below. But anyway, I do think Sansa will be successful enough to at least hold sway over the North as queen for some time. But naturally, the series might just end with her as Warden of the North. I know some people might question whether a female Stark in the North would allow the line to continue as Starks, but remember, there are a number of other areas of Westeros, namely the Vale of Arryn, which had female rulers, and their line, as Arryn, still continues at least to exist beyond Book 5 of the series. So, as of now, going into Book 6, and not knowing what the upcoming History of Westeros book contains in terms of information, I'm going to predict that the series ends with Sansa ruling the North. Also, I think this is a good point where I might draw your attention on something I find kind of similar between the remaining 4 Stark children and the original 4 children in the Chronicles of Narnia series, actually. Because there are 4 siblings in, the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe book. There's 2 boys and 2 girls who basically enter Narnia, this fantastical dreamlike world, I guess. But by the end of that book series, the Chronicles of Narnia, and this is a spoiler alert for those of you who haven't read those books, the only one out of those 4 siblings to stay in the real world was the oldest girl, Susan, really, who had, basically come to love her material or earthly possessions and didn't think the magical world of her childhood was even real anymore. So Sansa, in a similar way as the oldest daughter and the oldest daughter of the Starks anyway, and so far as she seems to be really the only one who hasn't exhibited any overt signs of warging or magical possessions or possessing any supernatural type of special abilities. And yeah, I know that it's a bit of a debated topic and all that, but overtly anyway, it seems to be the case that she is not a warg like her siblings was, but of course Lady did die in the beginning of Book 1. Naturally, I do not know, and I can't assume George R. R. Martin is even remotely trying to parallel also these Stark children with the Pevensies of the Chronicles of Narnia, but you have to admit it would be an interesting and paralleling choice to make if Sansa is the Stark to be completely grounded in the material world of ruling the North, while her remaining 3 siblings are stuck in the more fantastical realms of, being ring seers, wargs, and even face-changing assassins in the case of Arya. So I will leave that thought there. But now, of course, you may ask where this leaves the last Stark daughter, who is equally last in line to Winterfell in terms of the direct Stark children. But I can only say I have a number of thoughts for our dear Arya Stark. So I think the biggest characteristic that stands out for Arya and her link to the North is her incredibly prominent Stark features. The dark hair, the dark eyes, the physical similarity to Jon and Ned Stark she ironically has, which might lead to the idea that, given that Arya will maybe survive the end of the series and come to rule North because she has these, outward Stark traits, But however, at this point in the story, she's pretty far removed from a position of leadership, and her likelihood of leading the North, in my opinion, isn't that great. Again, and much like a couple of her siblings, Arya's recognizability as Arya and the real Arya is already an issue. We have a false Arya, basically present in the story, and there are also only so many people alive in the story who would be able to identify the true Arya for who she really is. Even beyond that, however, there is so much bigger issue at play. For one, Arya, as an acolyte of the Faceless Men right now, effectively means she's supposed to give up her previous identity as a Stark. There are only three things which keep her somewhat linked to her former life at this point. The first, of course, being the sword Needle, which is the one that Jon Snow gave her and which she has hidden away in the House of Black and White. The second is her wolf dreams, which are made fairly clear in the Mercy chapter for Winds of Winter. And interestingly, it is hinted that Bran might be watching her wolf through a weirwood tree as well, roaming the lands. And the third, of course, third real point which I want to bring up is her kill list, which still includes the likes of, Ilyn Payne, Meryn Trent, and, of course, Cersei Lannister, all who were involved in the murder of her father and the Northmen who came to King's Landing as well. Given the persistence of these three elements, I guess, I do think that this is a strong sign that Arya will return to the world of Westeros and will, in some form, either directly or indirectly play a role in assisting her remaining siblings against those who might harm them. Particularly those who are still on our kill list are in some pretty big trouble, I would say. But I really want to avoid getting into too much depth in discussing the Faceless Men at this point and their whole role in the universe of A Song of Ice and Fire. But given that I've just made a video on that with Bilal, and I'll post that one after this one. But there are, nevertheless, a couple of questions I think we need to ask ourselves insofar as they relate to Arya, and what what this means effectively for her role in the future of A Song of Ice and Fire. Number one, so my first question is, if Arya as a faceless man opts to leave the guild and, re-emerge as Arya Stark of Winterfell, are there consequences to this decision? Now, we already know that those who ask someone to be murdered by the assassins, by the Faceless Men assassins, already pay a supposedly steep price, which may be more of a personal sacrifice than a necessarily monetary one. And, we do get a strong hint of the fact that, from the story that the waif tells Arya in the House of Black and White about, how her own father paid 2/3 of his wealth and even his own daughter as basically a sacrifice to go to the House of Black and White just so he could have have his second wife, the waif's stepmom, assassinated. So, again, from that fact, I wonder if possibly being released from the guild means releasing oneself of life itself, since I can't imagine the Faceless Men would want, a retired Faceless Man roaming the world, doing as he pleased and using their skills to basically just kill whoever they want for their own personal gain. Certainly if Arya reemerges and by whatever twist and circumstances she's the only Stark left and succeeds as a ruler of Winterfell, I can't imagine the Faceless Men would just, allow this to happen without some sort of payback in the first place. At least that's the hunch I'm getting from what we've been presented with the Faceless Men anyway. Number two, if Arya is even able to reemerge as a Stark, and this role is either acceptable or overlooked by the Faceless Men, then would she truly be openly welcomed back into the fold of the North? Not only would her reappearance arouse suspicion, in my opinion, but without any of her siblings around to confirm her identity, because of course we're assuming that they've all been killed off at this point if she were to become the Stark of Winterfell, unless, of course, Jon Snow, knowing who she is by virtue of her still possessing Needle, is able to confirm her identity, but still seems unlikely that will happen, given that Arya, would be able to be fully reestablished in Winterfell since she's gone through such a traumatic, massive change. And, she's still undergoing this change right as we speak in the next book, assumedly. And I don't know if that random diversion made any sense, but basically, because of these reasons, I personally feel that we will not see a completely happily losing my ability to speak right now. Because of these comments, I don't think we will see a happy ever after ending for Arya, as she has, kind of passed that metaphorical point of no return at the stage in the Game of Thrones. Now, I'm going to summarize my thoughts now because I'm kind of losing my ability to speak. So, in summation, and excluding Robb and Jon Snow, of course, the four remaining Stark children appear to somewhat mirror the four Stark children of their previous generation. For example, Rickon and Brandon are both the wild childs of their respective generations. The resemblance between Lyanna and Arya is continuously emphasized in the book series, and both these two older siblings of Ned's generation, did not survive to see the end of Robert's rebellion even. But meanwhile, the other two Starks, Ned and Benjen, survived, and with Benjen joining the Night's Watch and ranging north of the Wall, kind of in a similar fashion that Bran is and will undoubtedly remain based north of the Wall. Whereas I feel that Sansa, seemingly similar to the hints given about Ned versus his own siblings, appears to lack the same supernatural warging or wolf dreaming abilities of her siblings and, of course, of Ned's siblings. Now, obviously, I do not know who will end up ruling the North or what will happen to the remaining Stark children, but given the books, given the hints given in the book so far, and just my own personal hunch, whatever that means to any of you, it's kind of just my personal opinion that Sansa will come to rule the North, with the remaining Stark children either perishing or remaining a part of the supernatural or not so supernatural worlds they have kind of become a part of. Of course, I could be entirely wrong about everything I'm even saying right now, but we won't really know until The Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring are released, basically. So, I guess I will leave you all on that note. I hope you at least somewhat enjoyed this video. Please feel free to leave a comment with your feedback, and if you enjoyed, don't hesitate to subscribe and like this video, and stay tuned for my other Game of Thrones or Song of Ice and Fire discussion videos, or more laid-back, fun videos in the future. So that's all, and take care, folks, and I'll see you next time.